Today we jump back to our NHL offseason plan series, looking at the 15th ranked team from the NHL's regular season and former back-to-back Stanley Cup champions, the Tampa Bay Lightning. What will we expect from them this coming offseason? Can they get back to being a cup contender next year? We'll discuss the possibilities coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're looking at the Tampa Bay Lightning and examining what we feel is going to be their off-season plan to get ready for next season. Of course, before we do that, in case you're new to the series, we're going to recap last year, take a look at how they did as a team, some key team stats, take a look at some moves they made, where do they sit for salary cap, what internal business do I have to look after when it comes to their restricted and unrestricted free agents, and how the team might change and what we should expect from them for moves when it comes to trades, signings, etc. throughout the remainder here of the offseason. Now, the Stanley Cup has been awarded. We're in full offseason mode, so we're bound to see a lot more activity kind of start to heat up here. So let's first recap last year, the 22-23 season for Tampa Bay. The Tampa Bay Lightning finished with a record of 46-30-6 for 98 points. Obviously, not quite as strong as we've seen in seasons past, but at the same time, still a really solid overall season. They scored 283 goals for being the 8th highest scoring team in the league, while allowing 254. So that's certainly a bit of a dip for them, 14th best. So it gives them a plus 29 goal differential, but clearly safe to say that their defense and goaltending this past year wasn't quite as good as we've seen in seasons past. Not that it wasn't good, it has dipped a little bit. Special teams, however, the power play continues to be one of the best in the league. With the talent they can put out there, I certainly would hope they continue to click at a high rate. And they had a success rate of 25.4%, which over an 82-game span is phenomenal for third best in the NHL. Penalty killing was only average at 79.7% for 15th best. So overall, this team can still score at a high rate. They can still take advantage on a high percentage of their power plays. The overall change in the team, I guess you could say, is that defensively and on the PK, they have weakened a bit. Now, are they a bad team or a weak team in that regard? Absolutely not. But there was points in the last few years when they were winning the Stanley Cups that they certainly were stronger because of all the moves they've had to make, be mainly due to cap purposes and being capped out here and having to trim salary over the past couple of seasons. It's definitely fair to say that their decor has weakened a bit and that their defensive forwards, I think especially, are not quite as strong as they once were. Look, a couple of years back when they were winning with Yanni Gordon, Barclay Goodrow, on that third line. That third line now is made up of some different players, and they're good players too, but to me, they're just not quite at the level as the other guys were. So that's certainly, they're still good, but they're a little bit weakened for sure. Now let's take a look at their cap situation. Right now, there's not much wiggle room at all. We're expecting the salary cap to rise by $1 million. We'll get confirmation of that here very shortly, but right now we're going with the premise based on the information on capfriendly.com of an $83.5 million salary cap. Was 82.5 last year, so a $1 million increase, and they only have $450,000 available. Now, they still technically hold the contract for former longtime Blackhawks defenseman Brent Seabrook. They would trade it for his contract after he was revealed to no longer be able to play, and that is an LTIR-eligible contract, and that gives them an extra cap breathing room of $6.875 million. So when you look at the $450 they already have, and they can put Seabrook on a long-term injury reserve, theoretically they can operate with an availability of about $7.3 million in available space. They have 17 contracts already on the books. So with that limited amount of money, though, they're going to have to sign anywhere from 6 to 7 players, or probably more like 5 to 6, actually, given the number of contracts that are on the books there. So we're bound to see some moves for sure. They're going to have to, once again, find a way to kind of change up this roster and likely reduce expenditures here a little bit. Now, at the deadline, they did pick up Tanner Janone. They paid a fortune for him, giving up a combination of 5 different draft picks. So he's a restricted free agent. We'll talk about him coming up. Unfortunately for Janone and the Lightning, he got injured early in the playoffs and really wasn't much of a factor. So that kind of, backfired on him in that sense, but he could possibly be a good player for them moving forward. And they also picked up Mikey Eismont as well at the deadline. And, to be honest, I think he turned out to be a low-key, pretty decent addition. Is he going to be a big superstar player and light things up? No, but I think he's a very serviceable bottom six guy who can play with some energy, not afraid to play physical, and be a factor in there. And they're going to need that, especially with some of the turnover that this team might see here going forward. So now let's take a look at their internal business. What are the restricted and unrestricted free agent contracts that are expiring? And these players either need to be re-signed or possibly replaced. On the RFA side, you have some interesting names, including Ross Colton, Tanner Jeannot, and Rudy Balcers. Balcers was not a regular in the Tampa lineup throughout the season. He had a few opportunities, but for the most part, spent the bulk of the year in the minors. Jeannot and Colton, of course, were regulars, and I would suspect that they're going to be qualified. They're certainly not going to be let go, because if you're not receiving a qualifying offer, you become an unrestricted free agent and you can leave for nothing, which Tampa, of course, is not going to let happen. I fully suspect after the hefty price tag they paid for Tanner Jeannot that he is going to be signed. I suspect they're probably going to try to do with him the same sort of concept they did with Nick Paul, and give him give him that long-term job security, but with a lower average annual value. I'm not sure what his AAV is going to be, but in the case of Nick Paul, he probably could have gotten, maybe a few $100,000 more, maybe $500,000 more on a, 2-3 year contract, for example, but they gave him term on a 7-8 year deal, and he got obviously more money over a longer period of time. So I suspect they'll take a similar strategy with Jeannot, because on Tampa, they're all about keeping the AAVs down so they can work them into the cap system, of course. So Colt, on the other hand, like I said, he'll be qualified for sure. I'm not 100% sure he returns to the Lightning, which we'll talk about in the next segment. Rudy Balcers would not be surprising if he is not qualified and moves on. On the UFA side, we do have some older veteran forwards here, including Bellemare, of course. Pierre-Edouard Bellemare is getting up there in years. Alex Killorn, longtime Lightning. There's been lots of rumors about Alex leaving Tampa in the past 2 or 3 years. Every time they've had to make expenditures, cuts that is on the cap the last couple of off seasons, a lot of people pointed to, well, Alex Killorn has really good value based on what he was making. What he produces, 20 to 25 goals for sure, sometimes closer to 30 goals. Really good, overall player. There's lots to like about Killorn's game, and he was making $4.25 or $4.5 million. So really, that was a good value contract, but they never traded him. He always managed to survive the cuts and managed to stay. And now he's a UFA, and unless he signs for really, really cheap, that appears to be coming to an end. I don't see a way they can afford to keep Killorn. There was some talk that they were talking to him again about a Nick Paul style contract, long-term but lower AAV. And it doesn't sound like his camp was interested in that. This could be one of his, depending on how long he signs for, potentially his last contract. When you get players to get into their late 20s or around 30, if they can get one more long-term deal, that might be it for them. You're going to want to cash in and get as much money as possible, as much as I'm sure he'd love to stay. It seems unlikely it could be worked out, but we'll talk about that a little further. There's also Corey Perry, Brian Elliott, and Ian Cole, and you can make an example for all three of those guys why it's probably time to move on. I'd say with Cole, you could probably make a better case that maybe they could try to keep him, but Perry and Elliott, I would think, would move on. But we'll have to see here. Let's jump into the last segment here, which is the top questions facing the franchise as we head into the full swing of the offseason. So what should we expect for change? What are the areas of focus here? Well, for starters, they need to focus in on goaltending. In my opinion, Brian Elliott didn't have a great season. He's 38 years old now. I think it's time for them to find a new backup for Andrei Vasilevskiy. To me, they need to ideally find somebody who they can trust a little bit more to play a little bit more. In my opinion, Vasilevskiy has played a ton of hockey over the past 3 years, and I just don't think he's as good when he's overplayed. I think you can make an argument to say that he should play a little bit less, and he'll be even more effective. Manage his minutes, manage his workload, and I think he'll be better, especially when you get to playoff time. This past season, it wasn't terrible for him by any means, but I think it's fair to say that, a few years back when their window was first really opening with him as the starter, he was a lot better. Look at how he performed the first time they won the Stanley Cup. Even the second time, it was he was unbeatable. But now this year in the playoffs, he did not look as good. He was not the best goalie even in that series, let alone in the playoffs. He was outplayed by Samsonov in Toronto. And looking at Samsonov's numbers, really, they were not awesome. They were good. They were okay. But, it was a case where both goalies could have probably been better, but Samsonov was the better of the two, in my opinion. Tampa, but not to say that Vasilevsky's not the better goalie. I think obviously he is, but he just didn't play like it. It's just, I wonder if he needs more rest, a little bit more of a break. They need a goalie who can help him with that and have more of a tandem. Like typically Brian Elliott has not played a lot. You need somebody who can come in there and play more than, like 20 games. You need somebody who can probably play, maybe 30 to 35 games, and it's going to break up that workload a little bit more. And I don't think Elliott's that guy. Now, the problem is that the more goalie's going to play, and obviously they're a little younger, can have a little bit more of a role, it's going to cost more money, and that's challenging when they're only working with $7.3 million. And with all the players that are needing new deals, the one that's going to probably get the most likely to get a new contract is Tanner Jeannot. Like I said, they're not going to give up 5 draft picks for 20 games or something or whatever, and a little bit of playoff action. Like that's not going to happen. He's going to be prioritized, and I'm not sure what it's going to take to sign him, but he could easily take half of that remaining salary cap space for sure. So if you take that out of the picture, and you've only got, let's say, maybe $3.5 million left to sign Colton, Bellemare, Killorn, Perry, Cole, Elliott, like it's not going to happen. And so there's likely going to have to be something else to give here. But Elliott needs to be replaced, in my opinion. No matter how they figure this out, they need another goalie. They're going to likely have to dip into the free agent market, or maybe they spring a trade. Maybe they find it a little bit easier to do when it comes to salary cap purposes. There is more goalies than usual that are rumored to be available for trade, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. But I do expect a change in that regard. Like I said, long time forward Alex Killorn likely departs via free agency. You never know. Maybe Tampa trades his rights to get at least a draft pick back. Maybe they do a sign and trade. That's always possible. It's becoming more common now in the NHL. We'll see. But like I said, there were some rumors and talks about Killorn getting a 7-8 year deal, but with a low AAV. I'm not sure what the AAV would have been, but if he's gonna stay, it's gonna be really tricky. If you look at the roster, here's the problem. You're looking at all the UFAs between Bellemare, and Perry. Killorn typically was, middle 6, top 6 at times. Then you get Ross Colton. So you get 3 of your bottom 6 guys or really 4, really counting Colton, Jeannot, Perry, and Bellemare. So 4 of your bottom 6 guys are all needing new contracts. There's not going to be much consistency. Then you get Nick Paul and you've got Pat Maroon are the only other 2 guys that are signed. And Maroon doesn't have much time left on his. I think he's only got 1 more year. So, there's going to be turnover down there for sure. And I don't know how they're going to work this, because at the end of the day, you'd not really want to trade a top 6 forward. You get Stamkos, Kucherov, Point. They're not going to want to move any of those guys, so it's not going to be easy. There's going to likely be another, maybe cut here of something substantial that we just haven't figured out yet. So hard to say what happens, but Killorn, the odds of him returning, unfortunately, not good. When it comes to guys like Corey Perry, Bellemare, and Cole, especially just to look at Bellemare and Perry, for example, though, you look at, they're only making $1 million. If you can't afford to re-sign them, and how are you gonna? There's not a lot of opportunity to save money there. I mean, maybe they have to really dip hard into free agency and find guys you can sign for $750, $800, shave a couple $100,000 off. At the end of the day, though, I'm not sure, but it sounds like Corey Perry for sure is not being re-signed and heading to free agency. Maybe he surprises us, but that's what it was sounding like. I can't say it for sure on Bellemare, but I would think that the odds of them not returning are pretty good. When it comes to Ian Cole, the decor is not what it used to be in Tampa. If they could find a way to keep them, it would be wise, unless they could find a way to upgrade. But I don't know. It's going to be very, very challenging. I do wonder as well if they find a way to trade for another LTIR contract. If they pick up another deal like the Brent Seabrook deal, that they can increase how much they can spend over the cap. They've been pretty good at figuring out things like that as well. The only problem is, you look around the NHL now, and there's not that many of those deals around anymore. Partly because over time, a lot of these contracts have been whittled out, because now you only get the 7 and 8 year deals, where some of these guys were on 10, 12 year contracts, and there's no way they ever were going to live up to them, right? So a lot of those older style contracts that have been outlawed now for a number of years are pretty much non-existent in the NHL at this point. So there's not a ton of options when it comes to LTIR eligible contracts. Like there is, for example, Carey Price of Montreal. Many people believe he's not going to play anymore. Would that be an option? I don't know. I mean, that would be weird, but it's a possibility. So, there could pull something like that off. I don't know if Montreal would want to do that. They're going to want 100% confirmation, of course, that Price isn't going to play again, which I think is pretty much a done deal. But still, there's not a lot of those options out there. I mean, at one point, it would have been more likely, but I do wonder if they scour the market and see what they can find in that regard. But I think it's fair to say they need a goalie for sure to back up Vasilevsky. I don't think Elliott's the answer. I think we're going to see a Ross Colton trade because they can't afford to sign him. They can hopefully bring back something for the future on that, either a decent draft pick or prospect. Tanner Jeannot likely gets priority, gets signed, and then they use the rest of the money after they sign Jeannot to round out their bottom six. And it sounds like that bottom six is going to be quite a bit different if guys like Bellemare and Perry don't come back. Like I said, if there's any chance of keeping Killorn, or even if there isn't, depending on how they look at this and see how weakened they want to be, they may not have a choice but to figure out another higher ranking, bigger contract to move out. And it's just not really obvious to me who that would be. I mean, they've lost a lot. There's a lot of contracts left that are, longer term, bigger money deals. And it's not, really clear who they can move out. They're not going to want to trade Victor Hedman or Sergachev on the back end. And after that, the blue line's not what it used to be. They got Chernak, of course. And then they got Cole, who's a UFA. They got Nick Perbix and others. Like they already had a weakened blue line this year. I don't think they can really do anything further there. And then the forward group, it's not obvious to me who the victim of the cap crunch could turn out to be. But let me know what your thoughts are. Like I said, we're gonna have a whole new group of bottom six, or largely anyways, a backup goaltender, a little bit of change on the blue line. And I'm not convinced that this team is going to be a cup contender. Will they still be a playoff team? Will they still be, one of those teams that are in the mix? Absolutely. But I don't know that they've really been able to maintain anymore that level that they were at a couple of years back. I kind of see them as kind of dropping here slowly. And we'll see they're not average, but they're working their way towards that, in my opinion, over time. Let me know your thoughts on the offseason for the Lightning. What moves will we see? Let me know in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.